It didn't matter how far he ran or where he hid. Rib Gnasher was right behind. The chase went on for hours, but Dresden kept pushing forward. Drenched in sweat, hands soaked in blood, all he could do was thrust deeper into the darkness and gloom. Kira was already dead, torn to pieces by the shadow beast of Abergrayon. He could not turn away as its shadow-drenched minions consumed her wasted corpse. The others met similar fates. Screaming, they died. Nothing could stand against Rib Gnasher. Once again, the impenetrable darkness closed in, and he felt hot breath on his neck. Dresden ran until he thought his lungs should explode. He fled into the swampy gulches and the suffocating alleyways of Perncilia. Many times he dared hope he had escaped, only to find the corpse of another friend. The forest demon revealed himself, and the chase was on once again. Dresden woke suddenly, teary-eyed and afraid to look around the room in case Rib Gnasher followed him into the waking world, if he was truly awake at all. He saw Kira, a warm spot under the thin sheets. Dresden slipped away. There was no chance he'd fall back asleep. Perhaps ever. Good day, fellow adventurers. Hello, wonderful people. So glad to have you around. I bet you all sweat glitter. All your friends say you're funner than bubble wrap. Pop, pop. Come on in. You should know the routine by now. Take a comfortable spot and hit that like button before the line gets too long. This is Dresden's Tale, episode 74. It's season 3, volume 3, and chapter 70 in our hair-raising tale. This is high military fantasy, the kind that needs heroes. Ours is Dresden Fane, a dwarf, a warlock, a guy who gets things done. He's a warrior of the Stone Clan, ready to tussle and loyal to a fault. I'm Lewis Nichols, bearer of the beard, master of the secret dwarven language of Grumbly Mumbly. I'm the guy who wrote this thing, a plotless venture spanning 2 decades and a whole cartload of Word documents. Thanks to YouTube, I now have a reasonable way to pass it on to you. Have you ever considered the trauma of living in a fantasy world? Warrior or prole, some of this stuff has got to have an effect. When a character dies in your campaign, does it carry an emotional weight? Is there a funeral? Are statues erected and stories told? Or do you just loot the body and toss it onto the pyre? An adventurer is certainly the type not to be terribly bothered, but everyone has a threshold. Has your wrecking ball of a warlord ever faced a company of soldiers? They're so fragile, so easy to pile up like cordwood. Hey man, these guys had lives. They had parents and lovers. That's gotta leave a mark. Now settle down, settle down. I'm not arguing for less violence in gaming. I'm just saying, death, danger, loss, and gore can't always be shrugged off like a bad day at work. Sometimes your character is going to lose some sleep over it. Speaking of, our dwarf is up and about, wandering around the glaring night of Vool. I see our little buddy. There he is, walking up the stairs to check on the night watch. Let's go! Here at the top of Stormbound Keep, it's Thoth's 18th, 2053. Huh, that's not a typo. That's right, it's a whole new year.
Tribulations 101. In the progression, gods will fade from view, even as the divine presence grows.
Get out of here, you dirty crows. Macelius waved his arms, driving the dark-feathered avians out of the room. Dresden entered the tower guard's ready room. It was a space the old night watch fought to defend several times and managed to hold on to it. Once, the new watch objected to Irving, arguing the old watch had no standing. All the High Warden said was, "Oh, and walked away. It was the middle of the night, and Dresden wasn't the only one having trouble sleeping. Why were there crows on the window's ledge? Crows? Wait, stop! This is a sign. Cormac recently joined Macelius' little group. Dresden didn't think the warrior could be happy anywhere. The aspiring priest of Oggs approached the birds like they were puppies in need of a handout. Bag of bones! They're everywhere! The human pulled the blinds back and gazed out the window. Everything dimmed. Passions! Dresden twisted his leather cap and held up his shield. It's not the passions. It's a million circling birds. Definitely a sign. Dresden grumbled, trying to straighten his hat. It's too early for signs. What time is it? You lost? It's barely a new day. Macelius laughed at him as he crawled out from under the bed. Kira kicked him out again. Dresden gave a rueful grunt. Dreams. Get up here, or you all gotta see this, Krillich yelled down from the roof. The excitement in his voice was enough to send everyone running. Dresden ran back down to get his pack first. Up! Everybody up! Something's happening! With the delay and his height disadvantage, Dresden had to fight his way to a good vantage point. Someday he would have to figure out how to augment his vision, but for now he waited for a spyglass to come his way. When he saw the cause for everybody's excitement, he merely nodded to himself. Still a mile away, a line of battering rams, siege towers, and formation shields were beginning to close on the city. So it will start tomorrow, Cormac sounded eager. Finally. No, it started already, Krillich pointed off to the right of the line. 400 heavy horse were engaged with a similar number of the enemy. Wyverns, hippogriffs, giant bats, and crows circled in on the melee. For the Iterians, archers moved forward, some goblins, others velito. Why no alarms? Why is this happening now? Why aren't they sounding the bells? Because it's going to be a long one, Macelius explained. People might as well sleep for a little bit longer while they can. Sleep's overrated. Dresden ran right back down the stairs. His pack wasn't enough. He needed his friends. He kicked in Liz's door and jostled her bed. In the fight! Meet me on the roof. He did the same on the second landing where Orrin was staying. Meeting Kira on the stairs coming up from the basement, he could barely contain himself. It felt like his first day on the plane. This was war. The wait was over. Just as his elation peaked, he realized, if they won, it might mean an end to the siege. His reason for staying would evaporate into a hollow victory. Kira looked up at him with a confused gaze. They'd have to figure it out later. Are you ready to jump into a fight? Yeah, I guess. What's happening? She cocked her head as horns finally started to sound. They're coming. Meet me on the roof, ready to jump into a fight. There's already units going at it. We'll hit that well we were talking about. Dresden got back down to their room. He swapped out his boots and dropped his coin purse. Trading a hatchet for a long knife, he cut his travel weight by a total of 10 pounds. In his own skiff, his weight wouldn't matter, but there were other warlocks and no raid ever went as planned. Running back upstairs, he was fighting the tide, but once he was there, found it less crowded than before. Warriors who had just come up for a look were now on their way down to their actual stations. Out beyond the walls, things didn't look much different than before. It would be hours before the Iterians were threatening the actual walls, if they ever got that far. That would be largely determined in the maelstrom of the cavalry battle. Even Dresden could make out the flashes of magical lightning and blasts of fire. How many legendary warriors clashed in that sun-sprayed ball of death? A decisive victory in that battle might alter the outcome of the whole advance. It could end the war all on its own. I've figured out one thing in the last 2 years. Campaigning is 5 parts boredom and 1 part exciting. Half the time you miss out on the exciting part. We're not going to miss out today. We're going to hit their camp, burn some wagons, and run a couple wells, if we can. Dresden was cut off by a grating roar. He turned to find the source, but it took Kira to save him, roughly pulling him off to the side. As Dresden got back to his feet, a sudden wind whipped about and nearly knocked him down again. Just managing to keep his balance, he saw the source and peed himself just a bit. Metal scraped stone as a great steed landed. The entire center of the tower roof was now occupied by what appeared to be a living statue of steel and iron wyvern. Scales of shining alloy, smoldering power given form. The creature was winged and armored. Its spiked tail flipped calmly in the air. The look in its eye was casual as a monkey in a tree. Menacing forward, the beast moved like liquid death, careful to avoid harsh contact with the warriors surrounding it. It was surprisingly agile, but its mass and the strength backing it was unmistakable. Where its metallic body came into contact with the tower, it left gouges in the stone. Mounted on the wyvern was a man Dresden had never seen, but it could only be one person: Greg of the River Dogs, the undisputed champion of Jessa and chief of his clan. He could have claimed to be the top warrior in the Empire, but those men were above weapons yard squabbles to prove themselves. Just as he arrived, he left with no warning, his wyvern mount taking him high into the air, appraising the battlefield. "We will win," Cormac proclaimed, testing his range with a hurled stone. Kira giggled a little bit. "Yeah, we'll probably win, but that doesn't mean any of us will survive it." There was just enough time in the skiff to feel the cool, stale air before the hot, bright glare returned. The plan was just a framework. The goal was to cause as much disruption as possible. Cormac found a row of resting spears and began picking off the running camp followers. Kira let loose a line of horses, then joined Liz in engaging with a few lookouts. The guards were young, barely old enough to be part of the army at all. One thin-haired Tagara dropped to all fours and attempted to escape, but Cormac included him in his list of victims. The spear struck the young man in the thigh, pinning him to the ground, where he slowly died. "Your nemesis seems a little easier to get along with," Liz pointed out as they threw bodies into the well. A new set of heretics was upon them. Dresden struck an Itarian in the chest, giving a little ground to let Kira and Liz take advantage. Kira grunted with the effort of trying to crush the hairy man's knee. "I noticed. He hasn't even tried to take over once. I keep thinking he's going to be an ass, but he just keeps his mouth shut." Dresden turned to oppose two more fighters coming in to save their friend. His mind still lingered over the dream. His faith told him people were strong because the gods demanded it, hammered them until they broke or adapted. He's not my nemesis. Everyone has their own stories. If he feels like telling us about the last couple months, then that's fine." "We could just ask him," Kira suggested. The raid was a success, but there was only so much the small band could do. They burned a dozen wagons, killed 20 cooks, porters, personal attendants, and groomers. Supplies were destroyed, but most importantly, the Itarians continued to pay the cost of invasion. When the group returned, Dresden didn't bring them right back to the roof, but to the courtyard instead. They shared a few turnips and helped skin a goat for cooking. "Don't bother with that fire." A priest of Nev stepped up and held her hand on the butchered goat for a few seconds. The smell of seared meat wafted across the courtyard. She cut off a piece for herself and left the rest to be doled out. "Is this really it?" Kira asked. "Might be. They're still coming," Dresden grumbled. "I don't want it to be." She looked at her toes. "That sounds crazy, doesn't it?" He grumbled something impossible for her to understand and lifted up her chin. "Then we're both a little crazy." Liz snorted. "If you two weren't so damn stubborn, it wouldn't matter. Kira, come with us when we leave, or Dresden, go with her." "He can't just leave Nanook, and I can't abandon my family." Liz shook her head. "I'm not going to argue. Orn?" "Well, I'm not going anywhere. That is, unless we're running for our lives." Like most conversations, it was all the same things that had been hashed and rehashed 100 times. Perhaps there was a little more urgency in the moment, but nothing new. Orn and Liz both still waffled on what they might do, but it didn't matter. If the wind blew north or south, it was still just the wind. When Liz was bored, she brought up Prater, just for the argument of it. Finally, Dresden would get mad enough they had to stop the conversation, and it would turn back to training. That would last until Liz shut it all down because she didn't want to hear any more about spells and lore training. "The cavalry skirmish outside the walls?" Did you say skirmish? Liz made fun of the speaker's understatement. Just a minor kerfuffle, someone added. Really more a disagreement between friends. The apocalypse outside the walls, the speaker started over again, is a draw. I don't have a list of the dead, but it probably doesn't include any names known by all. However, your heroes are out of the fight, unless it comes down to a last stand. You are the heroes now. If you fail, me along with you, we all fail. The battle raged for 18 hours. Stormbound Keep very nearly fell when an outer wall collapsed. Liz was in the middle of that fight, standing her ground on the rubble and holding the line until she was physically removed after succumbing to exhaustion. At the end of it all, no one could call it a Celt victory. The Itarians lost many hundreds in their attempt to overrun the city, but never breached the core defenses. Only the west was lost. The main gates and the perimeter forts, all the way to the river, were now in the hands of the Itarians, bringing the enemy's camp so close the Celts could exchange insults without having to shout. If you fail, we all fail. Sheesh, no pressure, folks. All right, I've got questions for you guys. What did you think of Greg and his wyvern? Pretty nifty, eh? He's one of the big, bad, tough guys from the old days of Dresden's world. Patronsburg would send out questers every year to find the stones. Completing the quest and restoring God's faith in his chosen people was the only thing that mattered back then. Greg was part of a group that came out the year before my PCs did, and he's been adventuring ever since. There are plenty of warriors from around that time, before the clans formed, but not many have stayed active. A lot of them feel they're anachronisms in their own homeland now. Most have retired, that is, those who survived. Some are bogged down as political leaders in their respective clans. Others have dropped out of society entirely. I'm not going to get into today's culture wars. I believe in our children. However, you have to understand even I have a hard time really grasping how much the world has changed since I was young. I'm not even that old, and I still remember a time before microwaves. I used to love reading encyclopedias, and now we just have Google. I even remember a time that when you were in customer service, you didn't have to explain once a day why you couldn't match internet prices. Okay then, weird tangent complete. Thank you all for stopping by. I'm glad that you came out for the show. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. It makes me smile, and it really does help the channel. Whether you do or don't, I love you all just the same. Be good to each other out there. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Cheers.